Real quick, I want to tell you about a free webinar I'm hosting on April 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time called Repurposing Content for Your Podcast. Depending on the guru of the day, you need a podcast, you need to be on TikTok, you need to be posting on LinkedIn, and don't forget your own blog and newsletter. And this can lead to burnout fast. But I'm here to tell you a better way. By repurposing content, there's a reason I'm able to publish 3 podcast episodes per week, 3 newsletters, and post on LinkedIn almost daily. So in this free 60-minute webinar, you will learn how to capture content ideas as easily as possible, how to build your own content flywheel from content you've already created, how to keep track of everything, and how to create a two-way street where you're repurposing for and from your podcast. Sign up for free today at profitablepodcaster.fm/repurpose. If you are struggling to create content, you need this webinar. Again, that URL is profitablepodcaster.fm/repurpose. Hey everybody, this week's episode is a little bit different. It's a coaching call I did with a client named Scott Cowan. He runs a podcast called Explore Washington State. It's part of a greater website about Washington. The podcast publishes 3 to 4 times per week, and he wants to grow his audience and potentially increase his output to 5 times a week. So I'm trying this new format where I make a coaching call live with permission, of course. So listen in as I give Scott advice about SEO, website improvements, and how to point his enormous Instagram following to the show. The top takeaways as you'll listen and hear are that you should have a good website with an easy to speak URL. You should optimize title and descriptions, and you should, instead of growing your podcast directly, which we've talked about on this podcast, how to kind of do that, grow your newsletter and social media followings and share the show with those audiences. I think that advice works especially well for Scott because of how big his Instagram following is. That might not work for everybody. And one more thing before we get into the interview is I'm doing a lot more podcast or podcaster coaching now. I have a 12-week program designed to help podcasters get their first $10,000. So if you are interested in that, check your app or the show notes over at makemoneypod.com/215. There will be an application to see if we might potentially be able to work together. So if you like what you hear and you think that I could help you out, head on over to that makemoneypod.com/215. But for now, let's get to the intro and then the interview. Hello and welcome to Make Money Podcasting, where I teach you how to make your first $10,000 with your podcast. On this show, you'll learn tried and true methods to increase your revenue and turn your podcast from a money pit into a money maker. Hi, I'm your host, Joe Casabona, and my podcasts have been making money from day one without a lot of downloads. I'll share everything I know with you here on Make Money Podcasting. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast, the target audience, how long you've been doing it, and then we can get into some of the things that you're struggling with.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So the Exploring Washington State podcast, I can't even say my own show. What the heck? Anyway, we started the show back in May of 2020. Initially, we started doing 1 episode a week, and then in early 2021, we started with 2, and now we're up to 3 to 4 a week. We just released our 185th episode.
Wow.
So currently the way it's set up is that we have Mondays, we talk to people in the music business. Wednesdays is kind of catch-all businesses, authors, hikers, things like that. And then Friday is food and drink. So our audience is people who are interested in hearing about interesting people doing things in Washington State, finding out places to go, things to see, new music to listen to. So if you're interested in learning more about what's happening around the state, that's our target audience.
Nice. I like that, especially because, Washington State is kind of prolific for putting out popular bands. At least when I came of age, a lot of bands came from that I listened to came from the Seattle area.
There's been a handful of them.
Yeah, right. That's awesome, and it's cool that you have them themed, right? So like Music Mondays, then business on Tuesdays, and Fridays food and drink. People are looking to find something fun to do on a Friday evening, so I like that a lot. Now you're up to 3 to 4 per week. That is a lot of content, and kudos to you for doing that. I usually recommend. I do 2 episodes per week, and I might go to 3 episodes per week. People who are members of, I guess as we record this, maybe by the time this comes out, I will be at 3 episodes per week, but members of the Creator Crew know what I'm thinking about there. So this keeps you very busy. What made you start the show? I guess let's talk about that for a hot minute.
Sure. So the show is a spinoff of our website, Explore Washington State, which is a website full of content mirroring what the podcast does, just in written format. And I thought it would be more interesting for me than writing articles to sit down and have conversations with people. That for me is a better use of my abilities.
Yeah.
And so it was to supplement the written content on the website, and COVID, because we weren't getting out to go see things.
Yeah.
So we could sit remotely like you and I are doing and have a conversation.
Nice. That's really cool. And is this a full-time gig for you? Is this a side hustle? Is it a hobby?
It is my full-time non-paying job.
Nice.
I have another business that I run that keeps the lights on for everything. We've been doing Explorer in some capacity since 2010. So this is more than a decade now. It's morphed over that time. My interest, my focus is the podcast. My daughter handles the website and our social channels and all of that. And then I am the person who does the guest outreach, recording the shows. We have somebody that does light editing. And then I'm also the one that's supposed to be promoting the show. And well, honestly, I don't do a very good job of that.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the tougher things, right? Is when you have a podcast, so much effort goes into getting an episode out that like you kind of want to move on to the next one once it's published. But as we were talking about in the pre-show, it sounds like your biggest struggle is audience growth. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, I think there's probably not a podcaster who doesn't want more listeners, right? I mean,
right. Yeah.
That stat seems to be the holy grail, at least. But I don't want it to be the North Star of what we're doing, but I do want it to expose our content to more people, because I think given the variety of content. So let me ask you this question before I go further.
Yeah.
Since we have these siloed categories, so you might really be interested in what we're talking about on Mondays. Like you want to hear me talk to, Mark Pickrell of the Screaming Trees. You're like, that's cool. I want to listen to that. But you could care less that we're talking to an author on Wednesdays. And then Friday's food and drink. And you're like, okay, whatever. So are we hurting ourselves by having such a wide variety of topics?
Yeah. So that's really interesting. That's a really interesting question. I don't, if this kind of goes back to why did you start the podcast, right? So if I'm talking to people who want to start a podcast, I always think, why, what problem are you solving, right? And then that is the guiding light for your content and how you're going to monetize and how you're going to grow. And if why you started the podcast is to get people interested in Washington State and learn about things that are going on there, no, I don't think you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because the thing is, right? Like, I mean, like Stuff You Should Know is a huge podcast, but they put out 4 episodes a week, or 5 episodes a week. They do their 2 main episodes. They do 2 short episodes. And then on Saturdays, they resurface old episodes and Stuff You Should Know Select. So if people are subscribed, they can choose whether or not they want to listen to a particular episode. So I think more content is probably a good variety. Where do you host the podcast?
It's hosted on Buzzsprout.
Okay, cool. So one thing that I've kind of experimented with doing is on Castos, you can create these series, like you can create like a podcast network, sort of, and you can have these discrete feeds for each category that then I'll filter into a main feed. Like the Incomparable does this too. So like you could have Explore Washington State Music Mondays as a separate feed, and then Food and Drink Fridays as a separate feed, but then they both go to your main feed. That's an infrastructural change. I don't think that'll help you get more listeners. It's just kind of more things to manage. But if you are worried about that
though.
Yeah.
So if somebody listens to Music Monday.
Yeah.
And two people listen to Food Friday.
Yeah.
Does that mean that the show would show 3 listeners?
So the way Castos does it, yes, you could see an aggregated listener download, like listener or downloads numbers.
Okay.
And then you could break it down by feed and by episode.
That's intriguing, actually. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's interesting. Podcast networks in general probably don't work for most people, but in this case, if you are putting this time and effort into a bunch of these kind of discrete categories that serve as in like this overall show, then I think like a quote unquote network could work. But as far as audience growth, I think there's probably a few things that that might help a little bit more. So first of all, you use Buzzsprout. Are you publishing the episodes on the website?
This is where I have to admit that we are falling down 80% of the time. We are the intention is yes. And the intention is that each episode gets its own post, Explore Washington State / episode 131 and content there. I accomplish that, if I'm lucky, 20% of the time.
Okay. So I think that could be a main driver of growth for you. And I know it's a lot of work, and I know this because I don't do it myself. I have a VA who does it. So she basically, once I record these episodes, I write the description and the title. I might have to give my editor some notes, but after that, I don't touch these episodes again. They go to my editor. My editor uploads it back to Dropbox. My VA takes it from there. And she uploads it to the website. Now, the way I have it set up, right, is I have to publish on my website in order for the new feed or in order for a new episode to go public, right? So I'm using WordPress and I'm using Castos, and I'm using Castos' WordPress plugin. And so when I publish a new episode in WordPress, that is how my feed is updated. But I think having this canonical link for people to go to makes it shareable, right? Because otherwise people are just trying to share in whatever app they use. And if they're sharing it through Apple Podcasts, right now you're alienating slightly less than half of the United States, but like 70% of the world who don't use Apple devices. Or even worse, like if I share using Overcast, like that's probably like 10% of podcast listeners at best. Whereas if you say, yeah, go to explorewashingtonstate.com/164, and then you could share the episode, get the show notes. Now people are maybe looking at other episodes that they want to check out, or you have the subscribe buttons right on the episode page. So I think that's always the number one thing I recommend people do. And if you don't do that, at the very least, you can have so you have /podcasts, right?
Yes.
But maybe, so I'm not sure if Buzzsprout, I'm going to assume they do, because they're like a pretty modern, they're pretty modern. And in fact, I recently interviewed Albin Brook, who is the head of marketing over there, so you can check that episode out as well. We talk about starting a podcast, but so Buzzsprout is like pretty on top of things. Do they have a playlist widget, like a playlist thing that you can embed on your website?
No, they do not.
No, they do not. Interesting.
At least let me re-answer that.
Yeah.
I am not aware that they do, and I believe I would have found it if it was an option.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you were looking for it, I imagine
I'd like to ask you a question though.
Yeah.
So you said, Explore Washington State /163, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
I have heard in the past though that for SEO purposes, wouldn't it be? So am I trading off here? So I do like the way on your show you're like, /1 episode, 125, whatever. It's
right.
Super easy to remember. We've named ours episode -125.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I can't go in and rename them all.
Right.
But
so
to me, am I losing something in SEO?
Yeah. So this is important, right? People will be able to go to howibuilt.it/208 for the show notes, but that is going to redirect people to something that says like howibuilt.it/live-coaching/grow-podcast. So I have a redirect in place for the number that will then take you to something that is more SEO friendly for the URL. But that's a great question because you're right. The URL does need to have like the keywords that you're trying to jam on and rank for, and a number won't do that. But the number serves the number is driven by a redirect. So let me ask you this: what are you using for the website?
WordPress.
Okay, cool. So there's a few plugins that you can use for redirects. My favorite is Redirection. It's free. It's very simple. And you can, so that's the one that I use most of the time. There's another one that I think is called Quick Redirects, where you can actually create the redirect on the page, but Redirection's a good one, right? Because it has its own page in the WordPress admin. You grab the full link, right? The permalink for the post or the episode. Or even, right, if we're doing this, you can get like the Buzzsprout page, right? Because that's creating a page for each
those
for
are
each
pretty
episode.
Limited though with what you can do with them.
Yeah. I'm going to recommend that you create the page on the WordPress site.
I'd like to ask you another question though, and this is SEO related too. So we do our show differently than how you described it. You said you publish it and then that's what pushes out the syndication.
Yeah.
Our episodes go live at midnight on the date of publication. And so that Buzzsprout page that's created for each episode is technically, Google would think that was the original content versus a show page we create.
Right.
Am I overthinking that? Is that, am I getting in?
A little bit.
Okay.
I mean, so I'll just straight up say I'm not an SEO expert here, but if you, in this case, the canonical link is whatever you're going to want it to be because they're not exactly the same, right? Mm-hmm. The Buzzsprout page basically serves as a way to push your episodes to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the other podcast directories, right? If you're creating this page on explorewashingtonstate.com and that's where you're sending people, that's the canonical. And there's a lot more content, right? You've got the show notes, you've got a transcript, or a transcript section. Yeah, in a transcript section. Then if you send people there, then that's going to be the canonical link for the episode.
All right.
So I think transcripts too are helpful. They are expensive. I have them for my episodes, but they're going to help with the SEO juice as well, right? Because some things that are stated. I mean, this is really good though. Your show notes are very good. It's basically a blog post. And And so that's providing good content as well. So that's something you're doing very well that a lot of podcasters don't do. And I think that's really good. So first of all, definitely get a page on explorewashingtonstate.com for each episode. There's like there's a few ways you can automate this, but you're also like doing the writing. So I would recommend, if you're going to put time somewhere, definitely do that. There are services too. I mean, again, if this is your full-time, not paid job, I don't know what kind of budget you have, but I use a service called Podreacher to turn some of my episodes into blog posts.
Was that Podreacher?
Podreacher, yeah. PodReacher.com. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll send that to you separately, but I'll put that link in the show notes for everybody else. And they do a really nice job. The other thing I would do here is, I'm looking at episode 164, Monica Guzman, Seattle author, episode 164. Mm-hmm. I would absolutely make this title something different, more clickable. Maybe you talked, let's see, she's a mother of two. I never thought of it that way. How to have fearlessly curious conversations. I would probably have something like this, right? Where it's how to have curious conversations in a what's the word I'm looking for? In a polarized time with Seattle author Monica Guzman, right?
Okay.
Because now you're putting the problem that you're talking about in the front of the title. Right. And then that's also going to help with maybe people who are just browsing podcast apps. Maybe they don't know who Monica Guzman is, but yeah, I totally want to know. Like, I'm like afraid to talk about whatever. I'm afraid to talk about polarizing topic of the day.
Yankees.
Yeah, I'm afraid to talk about the Yankees with my close friends because I'm afraid they're Red Sox fans or whatever, right? So yeah, that is a problem that's solved, and then you're still highlighting that she's a Seattle author, right? That she's a Washington State author. So those are a couple of things that I could do, and then I don't know what your descriptions look like for what you put into Buzzsprout.
So here's the honest truth, because anyone that's listening to this is looking to improve themselves, so I can open myself up. I typically write those right before I fall asleep the night that the episode's going to go live at midnight in a dead panic. And yeah. I truly am. I don't like when I'm writing. I don't. The fact that you're looking at them and I'm not cringing is sheer willpower on my part. And I understand logically, though, that that's something that somebody who's stumbling across the podcast is going to read and go, or maybe they're listening to it. So I know that we need to spend more time crafting a more compelling reason to listen to the show, because I think the shows are better than the descriptions in most cases. Okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to say the show's amazing, but I think the show is more informative and entertaining than what I'm writing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's like, that's an art form. Like, it's really hard. Right. And I struggle with it too. I don't think I do a very good job a lot of times. But I mean, the description you have here, just like reworking it a little bit, right? Guzman, transparent. First of all, am I saying her last name right?
You are.
Great.
Or at least you're pronouncing it like I would pronounce it, so we're both wrong together, or
perfect.
Both correct. Okay.
Perfect. Transparently left-leaning, was raised by two Mexican immigrants that voted for Trump, right? So you could say, you can put that as the first line. This inspired her to write a book about how to have conversations in these dangerously divided times. Because that, I mean, especially like Trump is a very polarizing character. So this is going to get people intrigued and interested straight away. Right. And then it's like, oh, but like he wanted to build a wall, and these Mexican immigrants voted for him. And then how did they raise a left-leaning daughter? Like, why is she left-leaning when they're so MAGA or whatever? So like, you know, just a little something to spark that curiosity. I think as people are scrolling or searching, then they'll find, you know, they'll be more likely to click on that. So those are optimizations that you can make to your episode titles, descriptions, etc.
All right.
That's not the whole thing though, right? Because you still need to get it in front of other people. And the best advice, which this is timely because I just saw it recently, is don't necessarily try to grow your podcast. Grow your newsletter. Grow your Facebook group. Grow your Instagram or Twitter or TikTok following. And then promote your podcast to those audience who have opted into following you in those places. And I think that's really good advice because people might not always listen, but you have an audience where you could put the show in front of them when a new episode comes out.
Are you aware of any ways to track conversions from, let's say, Instagram to listening to a podcast episode?
The best way to do it probably is to create a short link with they're called UTM codes. Is that the right word? Yeah. It's like basically stuff at the end of the URL that's like source Instagram or whatever, right? Instagram, like Twitter automatically adds these, right? This is why they convert everything to their short link because they want to know where people are going and what people are clicking. I wouldn't be surprised if Instagram's a little different, right? Because they're not putting links in places. You can do it in your stories now. But yeah, like using those UTM metrics would be the best way to do it. And then you would go to Google Analytics and see, okay, Instagram is killing it, or like TikTok is killing it, or Facebook is not, even though they're kind of, do they have a place in Washington? No, I'm thinking of Amazon and/or Microsoft.
Well, Facebook has a small campus in Washington.
Oh, okay, cool. That's so interesting, right? Like, I feel like Washington is like the Silicon Valley outside of Silicon Valley.
I think we have the nickname like the Silicon Forest or something like that. You know,
because I like that.
When you think about it, Amazon's here, Microsoft is here, Nintendo.
I did Google not know Nintendo was there.
Yeah,
wow.
Fun fact, I used to be a game counselor for Nintendo back in the day when the Super NES first came out to the shores of the United States. Yeah, that's how old I am.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we have King County where Seattle's based, that region's tech workers galore.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw a stat last year that there was more people with the title of software engineer than worked in retail.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's really cool. That's a fun fact. Okay. So here's another thing, right? That you could do, I think, to try to grow your audience. Interviews are fun. People also like short form content, like short form tidbits, takeaway content, things like that. I had a coaching client, that had a recipe of the day podcast, and she would it was a short form podcast, and she was repurposing her blog content. So cause she had a recipe blog. So she would pick one of those recipes, publish it as a blog, as a podcast episode. Then she would put the player on that recipe page. So she'd have like listen or read on. Right. So this is especially because like the other thing you told me you might want to do is try to do more episodes per week. These shorter form podcasts, maybe that's just you, are easier content for a lot of people, right? Because then you don't have to book and do the schedule dance and do more editing. And maybe you can repurpose old blog posts and then embed the podcast episode on an already well-ranking page with subscribe buttons. Because I mean, you've got if the domain is over 10 years old, you've got good domain authority, right? Do you get good website traffic?
30,000 sessions a month.
Okay, so that's better than my personal site gets. That's better than any of my sites get, actually. This podcast is the most popular content that I make. So that's really good, right? So you want to leverage that, right? And I know we're like bleeding into this other struggle that you have, but repurposing that content could be a good way to surface old content, get people to listen, maybe instead of read, because people do prefer to listen instead of read, especially when they're commuting, and then get to more episodes. So let's see, I half lost my train of thought in there, but we were talking about repurposing, how you can grow, getting in front of repurposing that content to get in front of different audiences.
I have a question. And it's something we're not doing, something I hear people talk about. And basically, the intro, we have no calls to action on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
There's no calls to subscribe. There's no calls to sign up for the newsletter. There's nothing. We have a newsletter that we send out to about 2,500 people once a week. But basically references the podcast episodes that we published that week and references articles that we've published that week. Or every now and then I pull something out that's relevant, that's, timely, more evergreen. Would you recommend a second newsletter for just podcast listeners? And if so, what would be the reason that they would want that newsletter?
Yeah, so I think if you are asking that, then probably no. But I don't know what you're using for your newsletter provider.
ConvertKit.
Okay, great. So what you could do is have a call to action that is, hey, do you not want to miss an episode? Do you want to get a digest of everything that we put out and pick the favorite thing that you want to listen to or read? Sign up for our newsletter. It goes out every Monday, Sunday, Friday.
But yeah.
It goes out every Friday. It tells you everything that we covered this week. You can sign up over at, and then have I would say subscribe is probably a good one, right? So explorewashingtonstate.com/subscribe. Have the form there. Tag them as podcast listener. Or even make a separate form that you'll know if they signed up from that form, it's because they're a podcast listener. Okay. And then you could also on that page have your subscribe buttons, right? So, hey, while you're here, why don't you give us a little subscribe in whatever your podcast player is? But that's a really clear call to action. It promotes the website, and then it gets people on your mailing list, which then, because here's the thing, either people aren't checking their podcast player every day, or they are skipping titles that maybe don't sound enticing to them. But no matter what, they're going to see you they're at least going to see your name in their inbox, right? And then if you say, hey, in this episode, we talked about a very a liberal woman who has 2 Mexican immigrant parents who voted for Trump. This is a story that you absolutely want to hear, right? And so I said liberal, but I said left leaning. That's not me editorializing. That's just the word I grabbed. So again, this is a way you're getting people into a place where you are seeing them and understanding them a little bit better. And then you can also reach out to them and get feedback. Hey, what do you want to hear about? Because podcasting feels like a very one-way street. And any way to make that a two-way street is going to give you an advantage.
Okay.
Cool.
Do we have time for me to ask you one question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we're coming up on time. Why don't we do one more question? Perfect.
All right. You have any recommendations of how to get the guest to share the content that they were on?
Yeah, this is tough. This is tough because not everybody's going to want to be inclined to do it. People who are sharing a lot probably have their schedules their social sharing schedules very tight and curated or manicured, I guess. But here's what I do, right? Everybody who comes on my show, you'll see this, right? Because you've signed up with my Calendly link, when my show publishes, you automatically get an email saying, "Hey, Scott, just wanted to let you know your episode is out. You can find it at howibuilt.it/280. I would love and appreciate if you shared that." So there's one nudge. Usually people are, some people are super generous. Like they're like, yeah, I'll totally share it. The other thing I do is that same day, I use an app called Tweet Hunter to schedule all of my tweets. And on publish days at 11:26, to make it look real, I have a 3-tweet thread. Hey, new episode of the podcast is out. This week I tag guest name, like their Twitter handle, because I asked for that too.
Right.
We talked about whatever. You can listen here. And then I have like in the members only special, we talked about this, thanks to our sponsors. This is good for, if they're tagged, the very least they'll do is retweet it, right? Mm-hmm. And same thing, like if you tag them on Instagram or something like that, the very least somebody will be willing to do is share it to their story, because that's like a one button push for them. Right. And then similarly, my sponsors will also usually like or retweet that tweet, which that's not advice I usually give out, because usually I'm putting the cart before the horse. Well, if you get sponsors, they'll share it, but like that's not always the case, and usually you need downloads. The point though is
that you're showing the sponsors that you're appreciating them for sponsoring you. And,
yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, totally. So, so those are the two things that I do. What I've seen done where I could be better, right, is also send the graphics, because my VA also creates a couple of graphics. Attach them. Hey, like here's some artwork that you could share on social media if you want. But that's going to require them to create a post, right? I would sooner create the post myself and tag them in it, and then they could share it that way.
So the email that you send out when the episode goes live, is that through Calendly?
No, that is a little how the sausage gets made, right? I'm a developer. So I wrote a plugin that sends the email when the episode publishes.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's more automated for me. But let's see, if you know that you will always publish exactly 10 days after the interview, then you could set it up through Calendly, right? Because Calendly does send those follow-ups. Otherwise, what I would probably do is just create a reminder on publish day, like publish post, email person, and then use like a text expander snippet. Full disclosure, Text Expander is a sponsor of this podcast.
This is an unsolicited plug. I use Text Expander and I do love it.
Nice. Yeah. It's so great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, have a Text Expander snippet that has just kind of like the stuff I just said, right? I mean, like if you use like some email clients will have like templates too. But I generally like Text Expander the best there.
Okay.
Yeah. So you usually you ask for it, and that will increase your chances. For me, I've heard like 25%. For me, it's closer to half probably. Because again, I'm like already giving them the link, and I'm sharing and I'm tagging them on Twitter or whatever social media they're on. And so that makes the share a little bit easier for them.
So if you, for example, let's just use this conversation. When you publish it, you're going to tag us on Twitter, but do you tag on all social channels? Or do you just do Twitter?
I don't post the show that often to other social channels. So for me, it's Twitter. That's where most of my audience is. I'm on Instagram, but that's mostly like me sharing pictures of cigars and my kids. Two things that go hand in hand, I guess.
These are photos of your kids with cigars, right?
No, definitely not that. Each photo is discreetly a cigar or a child.
Okay. All right. Just clarifying question there.
Yes. So Twitter is definitely the place for me. That's where my biggest following is.
So
And
would
that's
you
like,
recommend
yeah.
we do this where our biggest following is?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
And if and if you have like, so feels like maybe Instagram is that for you, or would it be Facebook?
We have like 86,000 followers on Instagram and 20,000 on Facebook.
That's so many. Yes, both places definitely do that. And
See,
I
like
mean, like
Twitter, we have like 500.
right. Okay. So Instagram for sure. And then Instagram allows you to automatically post over to Facebook, right? Because they're the same company.
Correct.
And if you convert to a business account, if you haven't done that already,
We do. We have.
okay. So you can do advanced scheduling.
Okay.
So like if you're batching episodes, right, you can use like Buffer or Publer or one of the other million
Tailwind, I think.
Tailwind, yeah, to schedule those out. And that's exactly what I do on podcast batching days. I'll record these episodes, I'll put them in folders, and then I will write the titles and the intros. Like it's usually Thursdays. I'll write the titles and the intros. I'll record the bumpers. I'll write the social media, and I'll put it in Tweet Hunter.
Okay.
So I'm like kind of in that mode, doing it, churning through that, and then all of that goes out to either the robots that will publish it or the people, my team, who will do it. So totally recommend that because, and with Instagram, I mean, I don't know how effective audiograms really are. The only stats I've heard about audiogram, which is like those video clips, the only real stats I've heard from them come from companies that specialize in making audiograms. So like that's like 4 out of 5 doctors say smoke or whatever. Like, so, but what you could do instead is record a quick video, right? And say like, hey, or if you're using Riverside, ask your guest, hey, is it okay if I record the video and release part of this on Instagram?
All right.
Right? Because that's not extra work, right? The thing I just said is extra work. But if you just like, and Riverside, because you use Riverside, right? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So Riverside, okay. Again, also full disclosure, they've sponsored this podcast in the past. I swear I own like most of when I do this, it's because I already use the tools, right? But they're pretty effective at like picking good clips or screenshots, right? So, I
don't agree with you. I don't agree.
Okay.
Man, everyone just looks awful.
Oh, really?
It's like the screenshot will be, you look great. I'm staring into space. I look okay. You're staring into space. It's like, can we cut and paste together?
Yeah.
Then we got one.
Right. Totally. But like, I don't know. But they also make it pretty easy to clip the interview.
Yeah, I haven't played with that.
I haven't extensively. I tried it out a little bit, but it's like built in now, right? So when you're done, I like to keep a pen and paper next to me. So like I look at the time. If someone says something prolific, and I'm like, I write down the time. And
I've noticed your hand hasn't moved this entire episode, so nothing prolific has been said by your guest. I apologize.
You said something I wrote down, but this is me like doling out advice, right? Usually, if I'm, oh yes, that was a good thought that I had. That doesn't feel very good to me. But that might be again. This is a little bit extra work, but if you're gonna leverage 86,000 followers on Instagram, even if we play like the 1% rule, that's like a good chunk of people who might come over.
But see, here's the thing. That's not even close to what we're converting over. It's if we put something on Instagram for the podcast, we're lucky to get like 2 people.
So what are you putting over on Instagram?
I'm not allowed to go to Instagram. That's my daughter's job. So I'm too old. So she says she can't go look. So we'd have to go.
I also feel too old for Instagram.
Yeah. Anyway, and that might be also part of it though, is that the audience on Instagram is different than the audience for the podcast.
Yeah, maybe. And Facebook's audience skews older. So I might experiment a little bit more over there, right? Because you have quite a following over there too. But it probably depends. Instagram has straight up said they're favoring video now. So if you at least experiment here and there with video, either like a 30-second thing that you or your daughter records and puts in Reels, saying like, hey, just had this great interview, like keep an eye out for it, blah, blah, blah. Or a clip that you're lifting from Riverside. Try it a couple of times and see what it does, because we're all slaves to the algorithm on these sites. And Instagram has capriciously decided that they want to do more video now. But and then here's something that I'm going to work on this summer, especially, is vertical short form video that I can share everywhere. So like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels. Because again, this is something that if I carve out an hour and I either bring a change of shirt or just always wear the same shirt in these things, I can record a bunch of those and then schedule them out for a while. And so short form video is, YouTubers will, like longtime YouTubers like CGP Grey has said like this doesn't work for him. But by and large, I've heard that this is a great way to get yourself in front of new eyeballs, especially on TikTok. TikTok like really works with getting you in front of new people. So this is a thing that I have fought because I don't like TikTok for a number of reasons. But as I try to grow my audience and take this show and my podcast services to the next level, I think it's at least something I'm willing to invest 3 months in, we'll say. So a couple of hours, record short form videos, send them over to TikTok.
I might try to put them on AOL because that's my generation.
Nice. AOL, very good. Get those discs for a free hour
I still
of internet.
Have some.
I was using them as coasters for a little while, you know.
I think everybody was. I think that was at least my circle of friends that we'd go over to their house and hey, coaster.
Oh, look at that, free coaster. Very cool. Well, Scott, I hope this was helpful.
There's some great takeaways. Thank you.
Awesome. I took some notes here in Notion, so I will summarize. If you're listening to this part, you've heard the summary at the top of the show already. But Scott, good luck. I'll keep an eye on your socials and I'll subscribe to your show. And I appreciate you coming on the show to do this live coaching session with me.
Joe, thank you so much for taking the time. This was great. There's some great takeaways for me, and I really appreciate your insight.
All right. Thanks for listening to my live coaching call with Scott. I hope you liked that. If you did, let me know. Leave us a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. And again, check the link in the description if you think I can help you on your journey to your first $10,000 with your podcast. Thanks again so much for listening. And until next time, I can't wait to see what you make.